All right, let's go ahead and get started with today's webinar. Hello there. Welcome to the 2026 Seller Fraud Playbook webinar today. My name is Kathleen Corrigan. I'm your host for today's session, and I'm excited to have this conversation with my guests, Nicole Pauls and Peled-Hayoon. We're so glad you joined us. As we go through this session, please use the chat to share your thoughts and your questions. These webinars are more engaging and more fun when we get a full group discussion going between everyone attending in the chat. So if you do add questions for us in the chat, we're going to cover as many as we can, either during the presentation or at the end during our Q&A time. And in case you're wondering, we'll be sending out the video recording of this session by email as soon as it's available. So without further ado, let's do some introductions so you can get to know the three of us a little bit. As I've said, my name is Kathleen Corrigan. I'm an account executive here at Incognia. I support a variety of teams from marketplaces, fintechs, food delivery teams in preventing some of this mature fraud that we're going to be talking about today and protecting revenue. Let's get to know our speakers. Can you please introduce yourselves so we can get started with Nicole?
Hey all, I'm Nicole Pauls. I'm a senior product trust and safety leader. I've worked in IT security for about 15 years now. Most recently, I've spent the last 5 or so years really focused on trust and safety and helping marketplaces, especially, be successful in preventing fraud while also keeping an eye to user growth and platform success.
Nice to meet you. I'm Gal. I've been managing the fraud team at Fiverr like over the past 2.5 years. We have many types of fraud. We don't have much time to talk about everything, but I hope I will get to as much as we can. And I'm happy to be part of this webinar.
Thank you both. Okay, so to get into the agenda, first we're going to talk through how seller fraud has been evolving recently. Then we'll jump into the specific tools and tactics we're seeing fraudsters use today. Then we'll spend some time talking about onboarding as the strategic battleground for seller fraud. And we'll wrap things up by getting very practical with prevention tactics that you can put in place in your platform in 2026, already less than a month away. So make sure you please stick around for the Q&A at the end. And with all that being said, let's jump into our first topic on how seller fraud is evolving. So as we all know, seller fraud is getting faster, smarter, and harder to detect. How are the underlying tactics changing? What new challenges is this creating for marketplaces? And that's what we're going to be digging into in this section. So Nicole, it'd be great to hear from you first. What's the biggest shift in seller fraud you've seen recently, and maybe something that surprised you?
I think to sum it up, the biggest shift seems to be in making more sophisticated techniques more accessible more quickly. So, on the fraud detection side, what that looks like for us is we see improved evasion. So, it's easier for them to bypass our old school protection techniques. They evolve their tactics faster. So, it used to be like weeks before, so we could make a change. They would go away, they would scurry to the woods, and then they would come back a few weeks later. But now we're seeing that move come in faster, and we're seeing more sophisticated attacks to some of our core technologies like identity verification, where it's easier to pass and easier to bypass those challenges. But those used to work really well. Like that used to be our thing that we would go to really be that last line of differentiation. So I think in the bottom line, it's really just harder for us to tell legit from fraud, and it starts all the way at account creation and it goes all the way through to listing and selling items. So for a quick example, I was chatting with a team around fake items. So they have this ongoing issue with posting fake items. And the first shift they've been seeing is from fraud being centralized to really common popular categories. So they used to target like video games or phones or whatever the cool thing, like right now it would be a Switch 2, or Christmas time is really popular for this type of thing. And then they started seeing it spread across a lot of categories. So fraudulent listings are being posted in clothing and home stuff and baby stuff. There's places that didn't get targeted before, and they also look more legit. So rather than being clones of previous listings that were really successful, they're varying them and they're using language that sounds legitimate. And at the same time, the telltale signs that we used to rely on, like email addresses, generic random Gmail addresses or providers, or location, like they would centralize to a certain location that looked legitimate but definitely wasn't, they're getting harder to differentiate. So everything's getting spread out, and everyone's goal, of course, is going to be to find them earlier, but it's also getting harder at the same time.
Yeah, it makes total sense. It's speeding up, getting more complicated. It's interesting too to hear the differentiation in fake listings or fake items, for example. I'm guessing that they can AI generate some of those photos. Is that your
Yep.
guess?
It would be easy to take a listing of, or a product listing, generate an image, generate text. Everything is just getting a little bit easier and a little bit faster.
Makes sense. Yeah, thanks, Nicole. Gal, this one's for you. What's one emerging seller fraud behavior you're seeing now that simply didn't exist a year ago?
Yeah, first, I'm happy to hear that me and Nicole have the same issue, more or less, and I believe every platform. So it's good to hear. And there are two areas I would like to address. The first is more the fraudulent seller behavior of fake identity. And the second will be to protect the legitimate sellers when they get hacked. So start with the first. The fake identity fraud increased with the usage of, as Nicole said, the AI generated identities that look authentic. And so it's become bigger. And also users can impersonate other people by stealing their identity. It's a bit scary, but this is what happened today with AI and some data. I can even pretend to be Gerard Butler or someone else. It's very scary, but we need to make sure we are there. I can give some example of fake identities. When I say fake identities, fake profile pictures, fake IDs, even fake IDs, license, and other documents. And also the second area, it's important to mention, we have the seller protection from hacking. So hacking was become more sophisticated with the advance of the AI, of course. Unfortunately, today, it's very easy now to hack a device. And AI can even call you using your mom's voice and ask you for the code you receive in your phone. So even if you not hack the device, you can get the code somehow with the AI. And so we must be proactive and improving our detection method all the time to first to identify those fake accounts and in parallel to secure the legitimate sellers that got hacked. And both areas come with new challenges this year.
Absolutely, Gal. With all the data leakages, it's so easy to find someone's identity online, sign up with a profile, use AI to generate a license. And I think a big call out with the transition this year is it's just much easier for, I guess, the common folk to use AI. Usually it was more sophisticated, and now just about anyone can put something into a prompt and create it. That's what makes
And
it
it's gonna
scary.
be, I just want to say sorry that it's gonna be worse.
Yep,
The AI is also it's a good thing for everyone, but with the good things comes also the bad things, so that the fraudsters can use it as well.
for sure. All we can do is prepare. Thank you both for that. I'd like to go deeper actually into the tools and tactics that fraudsters are using to automate and scale and hide their operations. Gal, I have a question for you first. What are some of the most effective tactics fraudsters are using right now to stay undetected, to bypass verification, like you mentioned?
Yeah. One of the biggest shifts we're seeing is, as Nicole mentioned, the use of AI to make fraudulent activity look normal. Fraudsters using multiple AI tools to fake their identities, and sometimes it looks completely authentic with the in the human eyes. So, for example, image generation that you mentioned before to fake their headshot, and other tools to fake their license. It's very easy to fake license, many kind of license. You can be a lawyer, you can be everything with other fake documents. This is harder to detect with the traditional verification we had all the time. The main challenge today is that fraudster can fake everything and without much effort. So it's easy to create many accounts. It's easy to create a bot. It's easy to create AI agent. Everything is easy peasy. So we must be aware of all those changes all the time. And
For sure. That makes sense. Nicole, what's a common blind spot or assumption that causes teams to miss these sophisticated fraud rings for maybe longer than they should?
Yeah, I think we're just piling on a little bit, but really with the shift in fraud tools over time, it's easier for fraudsters to diversify their tactics with a lot less expertise and a lot less time. So things we used to rely on, like uniqueness of device, for example, relationships between devices, it used to be easy because I'd have to have a physical device. I'd have to have my own physical device, or I'd have to have a number of browsers or a number of environments stood up. It's easy to generate or have access to through like fraud as a service or entire farms of devices, a large number of devices, or repeating tactics, focus in a single category. Those are now distributed across a lot of categories. So it makes it harder to find from a single pattern, which is burying the sophisticated fraud among all of the fraud. It just looks like I have 1,000 fraudsters rather than one. So one example that I heard about was we used to have pretty good success. This team specifically had pretty good success finding accounts upstream through device detection and basic stuff. But suddenly they saw an increase in growing on chargebacks and payment fraud. And it's only through the payment fraud that they tracked all the way back to the evolution of techniques upstream, all the way up to the account. And what actually happened was the fraudsters got greedy. So they were flying under the radar for a while and they hit this threshold. It gave them away. And then the pattern was so clear, but it went all the way back. And rather than being like a single line, it was like 10 lines that converged into the chargeback fraud. So it took a lot more to detect a sophisticated fraud ring. So what might have been obvious before is a lot less obvious now as it's getting diversified and they're not focusing on a single thing. So the challenge for us is going to spread us pretty thin, and that is unfortunate, but we might detect the fraud sooner, but the sophistication and the extent might be harder to find right away.
Yeah, for sure. And it used to be more of a manual effort for a fraudster. Maybe, for example, in factory resetting, they would manually go and clean their settings. But now there's tools that help you automate that in 30 seconds. So it's like the scale is enormous. And that's why it's so important we have these sessions to talk about what's going on, what we're all seeing, and share those insights. So it's really important. Another question here, I'd love to hear from either of you. If you were training a new fraud analyst today, given this rapid scale and increase of sophisticated fraud, what's the first fraud tactic you'd teach them to watch for in the next 12 months?
So I will answer shortly and I will give also time to Nicole. First, it's constantly been renewed over again and again. The type of frauds, I would show him many kind of tactics that happened before, and I tell him, look, it might be irrelevant in 1 hour. And so you should always be suspicious and curious, and I want to see that he is curious. This is the most powerful thing for a fraud analyst, and to be aware that the words change every time.
That's good.
Yeah, I think where I would actually start, which is really fascinating, is looking at it from the other side. So I completely agree with being curious, and that's a great character trait I think that we need to have right now. And I would look at the tools that are being used. So it's really easy. You can pretty much go search for whatever your marketplace is and tools, and go find what techniques are being used against you, and don't be afraid to look. There's YouTube videos. The bigger your platform is, the easier it's going to be to find how they're trying to bypass your technology. And then multiply that times 10. Don't be afraid to go look. Don't be afraid. Again, I think you're right. It's all about being curious, and it's important to look outside of just what you're seeing and to look on the other side and see what's being revealed about your platform as well. Sometimes it's as simple as Reddit posts. Oh, I got banned. How do I get back on the platform? And 5 people will offer a solution that sounds really shady, but might actually work. So don't be afraid to look outside and find out what people are saying about you that might reveal something to you that you can use to improve your detection.
Those are really good points. Being curious and then going further and being proactive. What's available on the internet? What are Facebook groups saying? Telegram, WhatsApp? We've seen all of that on our end too. I guess on the note of fraudsters being greedy and sharing their intelligence, getting paid to share their intelligence. So a lot of that's going on. I think to add from the Incognia perspective and a couple things we've been seeing this year too, I know we touched on device farms, but that's certainly something we're seeing is a lot more common this year. In our view, we're thinking there's two factors that contribute to that. The first of which, factory reset automation. So, like we discussed, that used to be more of a manual process, cleaning, wiping your device. Now there's, for both iOS and Android, automation that allows these fraudsters to do this within 30 seconds and really scale up the device farms and their operations. The second piece, and this is a newer one, is cloud-based device farms. So these were originally built for dev teams to run QA across many devices, but now fraudsters are using that same infrastructure to rent a device farm instead of building one themselves. So now the threshold's even lower. They don't need to purchase a bunch of devices. They're able to rent one out on the cloud. And actually, an interesting example we saw recently of this, there was a provider out of Singapore that was advertising their service specifically for managing multiple seller accounts for a big P2P reselling platform. So they literally had the brand name, the logo of this platform listed right on the page with a testimonial quote from a user. Maybe it's fake, who knows? But they were talking about they were super concerned the platform would identify the linkage between their accounts and how big of a relief this was for this fraudster to use the cloud-based device farms. Yeah, I think that along with the AI generated images has made for a quite interesting evolution this year. Thank you both for your points on that as well. I'd like to move into the topic of onboarding, and that's something you had touched on, Nicole, catching them at account creation. So from our perspective at Incognia, onboarding is the most critical place to be fighting seller fraud. And if you can catch the bad actors upstream, especially without adding friction to the user journey and keep your growth teams happy, that helps the fraudsters from returning to the platform after being banned. So this obviously allows teams to save time, money, and resources otherwise spent on that downstream fraud. Nicole, let's have you kick this one off. What's one upstream signal that's become absolutely essential for vetting sellers at onboarding?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of interesting factors at play when we talk about onboarding. One is, of course, that it's really common to have to deal with the reality of friction. So we might all love to say that our ultimate signal upstream would be identity or some kind of KYC check. So you really have to prove yourself before you get on our platform and buy or sell or transact in any way. But that's really just not a reality for a lot of us at onboarding time or to some degree ever. We really want that growth. We really want the reduction in friction. We want people to come to our platform and see what it's about before they have to provide all of that upfront information. So that makes it really tricky on our side. We have to rely on other signals and we have to start collecting them early. And I think it's going to push for us to have better intelligence about the device that's coming onto our platforms. So, who are they? How can we tell who they are, where they came from? I think if I had to pick one thing and only one thing, I would pick their true location. So, where are they actually located? Not where does their device tell me they are,
Yeah.
but where are they actually? Because it's very unlikely that my biggest market is, let's say, Los Angeles, which is a pretty big market. And it's pretty unlikely that the fraudster is physically located exactly where they're telling me they are. So if I knew that conclusively, I would be able to make better decisions. Or if, for example, they're providing their identity verification, and I have got to the point of providing that friction, and they're giving me a US passport or a US driver's license or a Washington driver's license, and that they're completely nowhere near that location, that would be like my ideal to know.
Yep.
I wish I could know that. I can't always know that, but you opened the door, so I'm gonna walk through.
Yeah, absolutely. Ideally, we can have the real world location because you can't imitate that. I can't steal your identity, Nicole, and then go to your house without,
Exactly.
that's the one really trustworthy.
Holy grail, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Gal, are there any early signals or subtle behaviors that tend to indicate a seller might become high risk later in their cycle?
It's clear to all of us that anything you fail to stop at the gate will become a fraud later on. Our goal is to catch them as soon as possible. Like one of our main KPIs is the time to block fraud users. And of course, we should take into account the false positive as well, and the friction for the good users, that we don't want to do so much friction for good users, because we want growth. And we want to identify the fraudster in the registration date. And some early signals we should check are, first, inconsistencies in identity information. As you say, like it can be name, it could be location, it could be many identity information and other information we might have on the users. Indication also for similarity with another accounts. We call it clones. It means that same users, same person open two or more users. And as you say, farms and things like this, device farm, it can be, we should detect it sooner as possible. Even unusual device or network pattern that we see, and every other signals you can think of. Everything, as I say before, you must be curious all the time, because things change all the time and we need to address it. Of course, not every indication necessarily confirm risk. We shouldn't automatically block someone for one of those, but sometimes it helps us to prioritize a deeper review. Maybe we need to do like a risk score, and then to the perfect users that we don't see anything there, to let them pass, and the risk score that in the middle we should put more friction and focus. So bottom line, a strong gate leads to a strong trust, and this is the bottom line. We should, of course, definitely, as you say, focus at the gate in the onboarding.
Definitely. And both of you touched on friction. So I'm curious to hear if you have any advice for the audience on having those discussions on maybe the risk and trust and safety teams think it makes sense to add some friction here, whereas that competes directly against maybe a growth goal that maybe the marketing team has. So do you have any advice on having those conversations internally and pushing for more, I guess, locks on the gate before it opens?
I think,
Yeah,
Nicole,
go ahead.
go ahead.
I think there's a couple of things that to keep in mind. One is to be able to speak the language of the business. So it's important that you understand those growth goals so that you can show partnership and understand where you're going to create that friction and how that is going to be received. So creating that partnership is really important in having that relationship, understanding what the growth goals even are and why those lines of business are important. It's hard for us, I think, on the trust and safety side because you really have to play both sides. You have to understand the adversary and you have to understand the growth target, but it will really help you gain that credibility. And the second piece of advice I would give is to be data driven and again, to continue being curious. So be ready to be wrong. It's possible. Be ready to test with a small audience. Be ready to target your protection to maybe a small audience, or Gal said about the risk scoring, start with the highest risk and work your way down rather than creating an intervention that every user is going to have to pass. Focus on those users that you have that higher confidence, build that credibility and that partnership with your growth teams, and understand how to speak their language so that you can build on that and really expand your protections mindfully at the right time, and not have the growth team worry less that trust and safety is going to be a hindrance to their growth.
Sure.
Yeah, I think as Nicole say, I mean, it looks like we coordinate, but no, the business thinking, I think every risk analyst today must have a business thinking and not only think about the risk, to understand the business impact, to know to show it in KPIs, in measures, it's super important. And I think the thing with the friction compared to the growth, it's not one against each other, it's together, because I think we prove more than one time with the data, as Nicole said, we must be data driven. So with the data, we can see that it actually helps to the growth and not damage at all. And I saw also a lot of case studies and things in the internet that I read, and you can see that it's just help the growth if you're doing it right. You must doing it right, because if you don't do it right, the false positive, of course, must be very harmful. If you're doing it right, I don't see any reason why it's impact for bad growth and should help to the growth.
I've actually seen, to add to that, I've actually seen a couple of times surprising results by measuring them, that by signaling more protection, it actually created more trust and more people wanted to use a feature. So what we might expect to be a negative in creating friction actually signaled that we cared about trust and that transaction would be safer and more people were likely to transact, which is only something that you'll know by measuring again and observing and not just theoretically saying the worst case scenario or the best case scenario could occur. Because sometimes you will find surprising results by signaling that your platform is safe.
Oh, that makes
And
sense.
I will
Sorry,
also,
go ahead.
I will also add something that never mind. You can keep going.
No, please add.
It's okay. It's okay. Continue.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I thought you both have great points there. I think it's an interesting way to think about it is A/B test to the certain group with more friction, like you mentioned, Nicole. And then you have that data to say, hey, actually, when we did this in this test group, there was better retention, there was a greater willingness to spend, which makes sense psychologically too. I think I'd want to spend more money when I knew that it was safer. That's really interesting. And of course, with anything internally, you have to understand another team's goals so you could speak to that and work towards it together.
So I remembered what want to say. I just forgot it for 1 second. So, so I told you, okay, go ahead. So it's just in one sentence. If you can do, not every time you can do it, but if you can do A/B tests, so push for A/B test. Because many times it's not possible, but sometimes it's possible for small things to do A/B test to test the result. Then you can, for sure, because before and after it's not always work. We have seasonality, we have many things that impact the business. A/B test, if you can push to A/B test, do it. And we did some A/B test. I can't unfortunately explain a lot about our internal A/B test, but it was super helpful and convinced the management, not only the marketing, also the management, that it's good to the growth, those things, and it's super important.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really good point. And thank you both for your comments. I think we're all in agreement here too. Incognia takes that stance of being really proactive, which it sounds like we're all aiming to be in our fraud prevention and catching that upstream. I think a particular point where that's super impactful is especially with ban evasion. So being able to recognize, hey, this person's coming back yet again, maybe it's a different device, maybe location looks different, or same device, but different information. If you can catch that up front, that absolutely helps. And as far as Incognia too, what are the two device or signals that we perceive as being the most impactful and helping catch that is one, Nicole, you mentioned trusted location. So being able to recognize behavior that can't be imitated or spoofed is that real-time trusted location. So you can reduce the fraud from recognized high-risk locations. So for example, something we've seen in the example of a food delivery is we saw hundreds of accounts coming from one singular apartment. So once that apartment or that specific location has been identified as high risk, you can automatically block any further account creations from that location. Same thing with multiple devices. If we saw there's 10 devices creating 20 accounts in 24 hours from this location, certainly high risk activity.
By the way, it might be also not only for seller side, also
Right.
phishing attacks and bot attacks. I would, if it's from the same, if it's come from the apartment or something.
For sure, collusion too, buyers working with sellers to maybe inflate ratings or fake transactions, what have you, but that location can help uncover that too. Looks like we got a question in the chat. Maybe it's a good time to answer this. As Nicole mentioned, device fingerprinting is becoming less reliable against AI. What are your thoughts on reliably detecting fraud upstream moving forward?
Sure. I think two things. One thing I've seen is a lot of marketplaces coming in either take the device location or identity and wrap that into their own device identity. And it's become more necessary to be mindful about how accurate that is. I've seen teams now exploring third-party solutions or better signals at the time of onboarding so that you're not just relying on that device ID being true. There's third parties, of course, that can provide better or additional intelligence or more signal at that time, and to not rely on a single signal. So we used to be able to say, sure, this device is connected to this and this device is connected to that. But instead of relying on a single factor, we have to expand, which is unfortunate because now we have to consider a lot of things. The reality is that I think fraudsters are still primarily cheap and lazy. So they're going to try to do the least amount of effort possible to make the most money possible. So it's likely that there are signals that we can accumulate or use, be they location, be they user agent, application version, all kinds of different factors that we could combine together and not just rely on a single signal. Whereas before, I think device was a really easy way for us to say, this is obviously a new device. But now, like Kathleen mentioned, when I can just go to a device farm and spin up 10 more, maybe device uniquely isn't enough for me. It's the connection between them that becomes more important.
Yeah, and I will add that also device IPs, every signals that we had in the past, not they are relevant. We should use it, but it's not always good enough.
Definitely. I think using multiple signals in conjuncture is the solution going forward, especially if your current device fingerprint can't detect app cloners or can't re-recognize a device coming back after it's been factory reset. You definitely want to look for a device ID that can, or a device fingerprint that can allow you to see those signals. So like tamper detection, that's another layer we have here at Incognia along with our device ID. And then using that with trusted location, we found to be the most effective from our perspective, conjuncture of signals. But absolutely, I'm sure there's others that add to that effectiveness. For sure. Thank you for the question. See, there's more chat.
They're creating a good segue for you, I think.
They are. Okay, so what's one thing marketplaces should absolutely stop doing next year because it no longer works? Good question.
Do you want, maybe, I was thinking maybe we should cover our last section first because it
And then
might
get to that?
overlap. Yeah.
Perfect. That's a good wrapping up question. Okay, so let's move on to next year and getting practical and how to prevent some of these tactics we're talking about today next year. So Gal, let's hear from you first. What's one practice every fraud team should start doing before January? Time's ticking. We've got a few weeks if they want to stay ahead in next year.
So first, it should happen long before January 2026.
Yesterday.
We don't have few weeks, but better now than ever. The top priority I see is to verify the seller true identity. If you have the seller true identity, it's the only way to prevent buyers from having bad experience with the fraudsters. And once you can identify the person behind the screen, you immediately raise the trust, the level of trust, and protect your platform also from those repeated fraudsters. So as you mentioned before, that users that create many accounts, we called it clone accounts. Everyone can call it differently, but those old chains of accounts that can come from the back, you close the door and they come from the window. Some example of how to do it is, first you need, I see it as in our marketplace, like strong ID verification. It's not that ID verification is enough. You have to do it right and to work very intense on it to make it the best ID verification. And again, the friction comes from the other side. And we must find it. Identifying the user location, as you mentioned, if you know the user location, it's of course you can understand that it comes from the same person, that the same person opened multiple accounts, and we have device farms or many other. It's of course it's a fraudster. Also, even if it's not enough today, device fingerprint can also help sometimes if you have it, the good device fingerprint signals and any other signals that you may have and you can think of. Just use it. If you have it, use it. Of course, you should use it right and with less friction for good users. As long as you have more of those indicators now, means you will face with less fraud in 2026. And we should be always on it. You should be curious all the time because things change and things will change. And next year, this call maybe will be irrelevant. I don't know. It can change all the time. We should improve ourselves again and again and be there all the time.
I really like that. That's my main takeaway is be curious, keep pushing and keep making those changes as you learn. That's a really strong takeaway. Nicole, what strategic practices or product decisions do you think will matter most for preventing seller fraud next year?
I think it's to sum up everything that everyone's been saying. We really have to recognize that it's going to take a lot of partnership and a diversity of techniques to tackle seller fraud. So we can't focus on a single protection, a single detection mechanism, a single signal, even. We have to think about layering our approaches to different points in the life cycle. So think about the funnel of your activity. Think about from the point of onboarding all the way to the point of making a payment or having a transaction. What are the pieces of data that we can have at each of those phases, and what data can we start gathering as early as possible? So maybe in some cases device isn't useful, but I still maintain that there's optimism because people are still lazy and people are still cheap, and they're going to try to use the minimum techniques that they can to bypass your detection. So the more factors that you're gathering early on, the better, so that you can layer those in later. And signal might surprise you. They might be sloppy. It might be a combination of factors. I have gone through this exercise in a couple of cases where we looked at what our signals were that we were gathering and even what third-party signal we might have had or any signal. And we were surprised at what didn't matter. So it's important that you're gathering that data to know what and when it might matter. And something that you gather in onboarding might not matter at that time, but when let's say, for example, the user that was created is no longer the user that is executing a transaction, their location, their device, or something has changed later on, you might need to make a different decision. So you might pass one gate in the beginning, but you want to keep that data so that you can continue to evaluate, consider things like compositing risk scores even, but you really have to start gathering that data, and we really have to think in layered approach, and we have to think about targeting our responses that avoid adding that friction. So having more data, waiting maybe as long as we can to create an intervention, but also creating some of those opportunities for our fraud teams to respond and gather data. Sometimes we might, I don't know, put someone in a little timeout or a little black hole and let them type to no one so that we find out a little bit more information. But there's a tricky balance. The more data we have to work from, the better before we create that friction.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think something you brought up was you can't just evaluate risk at the beginning. It has to be continuous throughout the life cycle.
Yep.
There could be an ATO or account sharing that happens in between when I create my account and when a transaction actually happens. So monitoring throughout that is also super important, it sounds.
Definitely.
Let's go back to, I see there's one more question. So first we'll go back to Gianna's question. What's one thing marketplaces should absolutely stop doing next year because it no longer works?
So I think all things with in the past we used to look at IP as something that I know where you stay. It's no longer it's nothing today. IP you can find people that clone in IP, but it's not really say a lot, and it's also with high false positive because sometimes the place in Fiverr that I work on, if my friends around there we are connected with the same IP, so we are not real clones. We are not the same people. We are not device farm. So of course, this thing I think you can take this data also into account, but it's the score of this become lower and lower, and also some of the device IDs that if you don't have a good enough data, it's not really relevant.
Yeah, IP in New York could be 2,000 people, for example.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And
Nice.
it's very easy to change IP today. It's very easy for fraudsters to create many accounts with different IPs.
Location spoofing is so easy to do nowadays.
Yeah.
Completely agree. We got one more question. Bratislav asked, how difficult is it to connect that clones are used by the same user?
Yeah, unfortunately difficult, right? That's the whole problem, is that it's become a lot harder to tell that a clone actually is a clone. Maybe not that it's being used by the same user, because they end up with tells in the end that let us trace it back. But it's a lot harder to create that web of devices that are all connected, because it's easier to they have a lot more tooling and a lot more access to spin up a new device and look like a completely new user that's completely unrelated to the other user, depending on the amount of effort that they want to go through. So it is actually harder, and we can't rely, I think, at the onboarding time as much. We have to continue that layered approach of what happens after onboarding. What is their goal? Again, be curious. What is it that they want to get out of fraud on your platform? And what is their goal? Because they're going to have to walk through all those gates to get to their eventual goal, which is monetary or identity or something. And those are the points where they start to converge, like the payment fraud. They start to converge somewhere, and that's where we have to focus, but we'll have to have all the signal up to that point too.
Yeah, I totally agree. You should use the data that you have, that you can use, of course, and try to identify it. It can change everything. It can change every time, and try to be curious to understand which kind of clone, why they're doing it, what's the proposal to open many accounts, why, and then you can understand. You can go to the answers. One of the things I'm looking when I'm looking for a fraud analyst, a risk analyst, so is that the things that we spoke about, the curiosity. So also that he know to solve this like analytical problem, to understand how to think outside of the box for those specific cases that might be.
For sure. I like that, almost going through your app experience as if you're a fraudster, because as a fraudster, what's their end goal? What are they trying to accomplish? Where are the weak spots? And thinking through that perspective can definitely help with that layered approach that you bring up, Nicole.
You definitely must be there.
For
Be with the fraudsters to understand what they want to do, why they're doing it, and
Yeah. Absolutely, Gal. David has one question here. It seems like an overwhelming time to be fighting fraud, given how fraudsters are using AI, fraud as a service, the speed, scale, etc. A lot of the techniques you talked about today. Does it feel that way to you? How do you deal with that without getting discouraged or paralyzed by it? It's a really good question.
so I think don't get discouraged. This is the first thing. You should keep investing. I think this is what makes the fraud team work interesting. That it's not every time the same thing. It's every time change. And you should start to think. You should think outside the box, outside of the box. Every time from new, we see. I think I cannot count how much new fraud pattern we detect last year and this year. It's so many, and it can change all the time. And I think I'm not get frustrated from this. I'm surprising how much smart they are, and I'm happy that we are able to stop these smart people because they are smart. They are super smart. So it just makes me a more energetic and not in the other side, that it's not dropping down or something.
Look on the positive side, embrace that it's not a monotonous role. It changes every day.
This will mean you need to be very analytic thinking and data driven to understand the pattern, to understand why, to be there,
Yeah, and I think to add to that, another thing that I have seen that really helps is to shine a light on that success. So measure your success. Think about how you are evaluating and measuring the success of your program. And maybe it's something simple like not just what is the percentage of bad content on our platform, but how many of our users are seeing it? How much of it is being exposed? Like, how are we making incremental changes on a day-to-day basis that show that we are doing a good job, we are maintaining? So you can't talk about what you can't measure, but maybe you can show and share those wins and make sure to call them out, because it is a hard problem and our teams are doing an amazing job of staying on top of it.
Absolutely. Have to celebrate the wins, big and small. Help stay positive.
Definitely.
Awesome. I really appreciate both of your insights today. I always really like these conversations and hearing from your perspective on the day-to-day. We have a couple minutes left for Q&A if there's any last minute questions. Otherwise, we can wrap up. All good. Cool. Thank you, everyone who contributed to the chat. If there's questions after the fact, please reach out to any of us three on LinkedIn. We'd be happy to support you in any way. And I think that makes this officially a wrap for today's webinar and our final webinar in 2025. It was a really great one, Nicole and Gal, amazing insights. I hope everyone in the audience got good takeaways that you can apply in your fraud prevention efforts immediately. I want to thank you both so much for joining us today. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll send out the recording of the session as soon as it's ready. Feel free to share it with your colleagues or revisit any parts you found particularly helpful. And again, any further questions, we are on LinkedIn, so reach out. And thanks everyone for joining us. Have a good rest of your day or rest of your evening, and take care.
Be curious.
Thanks all.
And be curious.
Definitely.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you.